They say power can make legends out of mortals, but it can also bury the truth beneath layers of illusion. Imagine a queen so powerful, so untouchable, that the entire image of her kingdom rested on her face, painted, powdered, and perfumed into something that looked more divine than human. But what if behind that radiant mask there was a darker reality? A reality of rot, poison, and rituals that seem unthinkable by today's standards. This is not the queen you saw in history books. This is the hidden life of Elizabeth I and the story of how her beauty and strength were carefully crafted out of some of the most disturbing hygiene practices in history. Queen Elizabeth of I ruled England with iron determination. She defeated the Spanish Armada, kept her throne safe from endless plots, and became known as the Virgin Queen, an untouchable icon of power. But behind the walls of her palaces, another side of her reign played out. It was a world where bathing was feared, perfume was treated like medicine, and the simple act of brushing teeth turned into a horror story. Elizabeth believed water was dangerous, a carrier of disease, a silent assassin that could weaken her body. And so, she avoided it, not just sometimes, almost entirely. Instead of soap and water, she had a ritual, a performance designed to give the illusion of cleanliness without ever truly being clean. Linen underclothes, called shifts, were changed again and again throughout the day. People believed the fine fabric would draw impurities from the skin, pulling sweat, dirt, and toxins away from the body like some magical sponge. Fresh cloth became her bath, and when she wanted to feel renewed, her ladies would dab her with rose water, vinegar, or herbal infusions brewed by palace apothecaries. Imagine a queen seated on a golden chair, not being washed, but carefully dabbed with perfumes and herbs, as though her body was a holy relic that could not be touched by ordinary means. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't neglect. It was fear. Fear that to touch water was to invite death. Fear that to show her real skin was to shatter the illusion of a perfect queen. In a world where monarchs were judged as much by appearance as by policy, Elizabeth's body became the kingdom's most guarded treasure. But the cost of that illusion was staggering. Her face became a canvas for what she called eternal youth. But what history remembers as a mask of poison? She painted herself in Venetian ceruse, a thick white paste of lead and vinegar that smoothed away every blemish, scar, and shadow. To her subjects, it made her appear ageless, untouchable, almost divine. But beneath that mask, the lead burned into her skin. Open sores, rashes, and scars spread across her face, and to hide them, she added more and more layers. Her lips were painted with mercury based pigments, each stroke lacing her bloodstream with slow, invisible venom. Over the years, her hands trembled, her memory slipped, her moods darkened, all classic signs of mercury poisoning. But still, she continued, because her true face was no longer her own. It belonged to England, and she guarded it with terrifying devotion. Painters were forbidden to show her true features. Instead, they used face patterns, stylized templates copied from her youthful portraits. Even in her final years, when her body was frail and her face scarred beyond recognition, her official image remained frozen in time, untouched by age. Elizabeth would not allow herself to be seen in daylight. She chose candlelight and shadow, letting darkness conceal the cracks in her mask. They whispered that if anyone touched her skin, the makeup would crumble away like plaster from a broken statue. But still she endured it, clinging to her mask as though it were her very crown. And then came the teeth. Her court whispered about them. Foreign ambassadors recoiled at the sight of them, but Elizabeth could not resist her one great addiction: sugar. In her age, sugar was not a common indulgence. It was a luxury, a status symbol, a substance as rare and powerful as gold. Elizabeth gorged herself on candied violets, sugared fruits, and syrup-drenched marzipan. It was her pride and her downfall, because she didn't just eat sugar, she brushed her teeth with it, a royal toothpaste made of herbs and sweet crystals that promised a fresh mouth but delivered decay. By the 1590s, her teeth were black, broken, and missing in places. Her breath, they said, could make courtiers turn away in discomfort. Sometimes her speech was so muffled by the rot in her mouth that her words were difficult to understand. And yet, she would not allow a tooth to be pulled. Terrified of pain, she refused to open her mouth for doctors. To prove it was safe, one of her courtiers even allowed a tooth to be yanked from his own jaw in front of her, screaming as the pliers tore it free. But Elizabeth still resisted, her jaw locked with royal pride. What followed was stranger still. Her noblewomen, desperate to mirror their queen, began blackening their own teeth with soot and charcoal. Rotten teeth became the height of fashion, a twisted symbol of wealth and power. If the queen's smile was dark and decayed, then to look like her was to look beautiful. Imagine a court full of women grinning with soot-stained smiles, a kingdom where decay itself was worn as a badge of nobility. Such was the power of a queen who could turn even rot into fashion. But this was only the beginning, because what hid beneath the perfumed gloves, beneath the gowns of silk and velvet, beneath the endless clouds of rose water and vinegar, was something far more unsettling. Elizabeth's court was not a palace of purity, it was a palace of filth. No running water, no flushing toilets, no escape from the stench of waste that seeped through walls and rushed beneath floors. And at the very heart of this foul-smelling labyrinth sat a queen who demanded to be seen as untouchable. Before we descend deeper into the shadowed halls of Elizabeth's world, where perfume fought a hopeless battle against the stink of rot, take a moment to join me on this journey. If you find yourself pulled into the darker corners of history, where legends reveal their hidden horrors, I invite you to subscribe. Your presence here helps bring these forgotten stories to life, stories that remind us that even the most powerful figures in history were haunted by fears and obsessions that left scars more lasting than crowns. But do not look away just yet, because the deeper we go into Elizabeth's world, the more her image begins to unravel. In her palaces, in her chambers, and even in her most private moments, we discover the truth that beneath the jewels and velvet, the Virgin Queen lived not in divine perfection, but in the suffocating shadow of her own illusion. And in the next part of her story, you will see just how foul, just how haunting her life of hidden hygiene truly was. Step deeper into the palaces of Queen Elizabeth I, and the illusion of majesty begins to rot away. On the surface, her court shimmered with gold, velvet, and music. But behind that polished facade lay a world of filth that even the queen herself could not escape. Her great halls had no plumbing, no drains, no flushing toilets. Waste collected in hidden pits beneath the floors. seeping into the air until the stench was thick enough to choke. Perfumed herbs and flowers were scattered across the rushes on the floor, but beneath them, months of decay built up into blackened layers of filth. The court may have looked divine, but it smelled like a sewer. Elizabeth herself sat upon what was known as a close stool, a wooden chair, carved and cushioned, beneath which rested a simple ceramic pot. Elegant on the outside, foul beneath, it had to be emptied by hand, scrubbed, perfumed, and carried away. But not by a servant of low rank. The one who performed this duty was the groom of the stool, a nobleman of trusted standing who not only attended to the Queen's most private needs, but also whispered with her in confidence. In Elizabeth's England, even the act of relieving oneself became tangled with politics and power. The groom of the stool knew secrets no statesman could ever hope to hear. He held influence, not in public, but in the silence of her most personal moments. Yet for all her rituals and perfumes, Elizabeth could never fully escape the reality of her world. Chamber pots overflowed, cesspits festered, and at night, men known as gong farmers and night soil carriers shuffled through the darkness with buckets of human waste. They dumped their loads into trenches and pits, the stench rising like a living curse across the palace grounds. This was the reality of royalty, velvet on the walls, filth beneath the floors. Elizabeth moved her court often, not only for politics, but to flee the rising tide of odor. She could silence her rivals, defeat invading armadas, and paint her face into eternal youth. But she could not silence the stench of her own kingdom, and so she created a new reality, one built not on water or soap, but on perfume and powder. Her body became a temple of scent, guarded against the truth of its own decay. She carried pomanders, jeweled orbs filled with herbs and resins, pressing them to her nose whenever the foul air grew unbearable. Her gloves were perfumed, her gowns were scented, her handkerchiefs soaked in rosewater and lavender. To those who drew near, she seemed to drift through the court like a walking bouquet, her fragrance carefully hiding the truth beneath. But it was only an illusion. Perfume does not erase decay. It only masks it, briefly, until the rot breaks through once more. Her hair, too, bore the marks of her obsession. Rarely washed, it was stiffened with mixtures of egg whites and sugar water, then powdered until it became brittle and pale. As the years wore on and the poisons of her makeup ate away at her body, her hair thinned and fell out. To maintain her image, she turned to wigs, fiery auburn creations that imitated the youthful hair of her past. But beneath them, her scalp was scarred and bare, another casualty of the mask she refused to set aside. And as the mask consumed her, she began to turn away from even the sight of herself. Mirrors were banished from her private rooms. The queen who had once ruled an empire by the power of her image could no longer face the reflection of her own truth. In her later years, the mask became everything. Her skin was said to peel, to blister, to crack beneath the weight of the leaden paint. A servant was tasked with powdering her shoulders in secret, ensuring that no eye would glimpse the scars hidden beneath her gowns. Elizabeth had become a prisoner of her own legend, so fragile that even a touch might shatter the illusion. She did not wash, for washing meant revealing. She did not bare her face, for to do so meant surrendering the crown of her eternal image. To wash away the mask was to admit she was only human, and humanity was a weakness She could not allow herself. Imagine her final years, a queen pacing her chambers with a scented walking stick, pressing it to her nose as she passed her courtiers, reminding them with every movement, I am the queen. I am not like you. I do not belong to your world. Yet beneath the perfumes and powders, she was breaking apart, teeth blackened, hair gone, skin scarred, her body slowly poisoned by her own hand. A queen who had ruled by legend was reduced to clinging desperately to the fragments of her mask, her kingdom never allowed to see the woman beneath. And still, she would not yield. She would not be seen weak. She painted herself until the very end, her face a mask of lead, her lips touched with mercury, her body wrapped in perfumes and silks. She refused to go gently into mortality. For Elizabeth, the mask was the crown, and the crown was her only truth. She would rather poison herself into oblivion than let the world see her as anything less than the Virgin Queen, eternal, flawless, untouchable. History remembers her as one of England's greatest rulers, the woman who turned a fractured kingdom into a rising empire. But beneath the myth lies a chilling lesson. Power can preserve a legend, but it can also consume the person who wears it. Elizabeth's hygiene was not simply strange, it was her prison. Every layer of powder, every drop of perfume, every refusal to bathe was another chain binding her to the mask she had created. And in the end, she vanished behind it, leaving only the legend, while the woman beneath dissolved into silence. Perhaps that is the truest horror of Elizabeth's story. Not the rotting teeth, not the poisoned skin, not the endless perfume masking the stench of waste. The true horror is that she ceased to be a woman at all. She became only an image, a performance, a mask of power painted so thick that the person beneath was lost forever.